Thank you for being present at this session. We have a little bit more than 50 minutes to discuss the component that I will explain today. But before I do that, I would like to just take a few seconds to explain the general architecture and then take into consideration the components that I already explained a couple of weeks ago. But that was only I'll do that to refresh our memories, and then I'll move on to the component that we as countries, as ministries of health, will be able to configure so that we can finally issue health certificates to the wallets, the digital wallets of patients. So what I will do first of all is to share my screen. Let's see, I'll share my screen in the desktop. And please let me know if you can see my screen. Yes, Eric, we can. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. Just let me know. I may not notice if somebody has raised his or her hand because I'll be running the demo, but please let me know, and I'll certainly answer any queries that you may have. The idea is for this to be as didactic as possible for you to understand the flow, and those that can follow me now, please follow the process. In any case, this video will be registered so that you can work on this on a step-by-step basis, and the idea is for us by the Connectathon to do the nicer part, the quicker part, which is to test this flow in a very easy manner. Provide the credentials to the different patients. We will be able to simulate that. We will have interfaces where patients will be able to see the certificates in digital format, and we will also have other parties that will act as verifiers of these QRs. That will include the digital signature of each Ministry of Health with the patient's relevant information. Now, just as an overview, we'll see that this component is the component that we already have, which is the Raxel IPS, which basically contains everything that you know. The first tracks, the track 2A, and here we find a subcomponent that will enable us to send the health credentials to the patients. That is the first part, and that is what we will be dealing with now. But why are we going to do this? Well, because at the end of the day, what we want is for patients to have in this wallet, in this small icon here, in a wallet, the patient may be able to receive that information in his or her mobile app or in a desktop app. And with that information, whenever necessary, if I'm in Peru, for example, and I'm traveling tomorrow to Panama, and in Panama, I can show my health certificate that can be scanned, checked in a flow that is as quick as possible. So the second component will be this wallet, and finally, the verification app that will scan a QR code. And this QR code, whenever the verifier scan this, the app will check that in cryptographic terms, the signature is correct. Now we'll focus today on the first part, and this is the only component that we as ministries of health is going to be important for us for configuration purposes. Any other person will be able to use the wallet and receive information in his or her wallet, and the verification app is an independent app, an independent verification, and any person will be able to use this app, scan a QR code, and simulate how the QR code is verified, how it is checked online. And one last component is the committee component. And for the Raxel example, that will basically allow all those that conduct this configuration exercise that we will do now will be able to be included in the reliability component. So we have our country component, the wallet, the verification app, and finally, we have a committee component, but we're not going to focus on that. We'll only be focusing on this first component. Now, having said that, I will do, let's see, we will start the configuration of this process. So this repository is the repository that we all know. Many of us know this already. And this repository already includes the LACPASS, LACCHAIN component that will enable us to send the health certificates, as we saw in the diagram, to our patients. And the first thing that we have to do is to clone this repository, to launch this repository, and after that, follow the instructions in the last part here, this part here. So when we launch this repository, we will do two things. First of all, we will configure, conduct a one-time configuration of the repository. We'll go to the service which is running in the Docker. We will hit it several occasions to conduct the setup. And every time we send a credential to a patient, well, we will be basically sending these credentials to the patient. So that we'll be doing two parts here in this exercise. First of all, we launch the repository. And secondly, we will do these two steps. First, in the first step, we conduct these setup of the LACCHAIN as part of the onboarding. And secondly, we will be able to send health certificates to patient wallets. And I emphasize that we must be clear on the steps that we are following here. Any questions, any doubts so far? In any case, I repeat, I'm quite willing to answer any doubts that you may have. First of all, I have to clone this repository. I'll assume that I'm in zero, that I know nothing. Well, many of us have already configured this, but the first thing that we would have to do is this git clone, and I clone the repository. I'm not going to clone it yet. I have a set of files here, and I'll just click on one of these files and clone here. So there we are cloning the repository, which is public. We can clone it. And that's it. It's already been cloned. The cloned repository is called IPS National Backend, as you can see here. And what I'll do is I'll enter this repository. I'll enter the IPS backend repository. And for the sake of more security, I'll use the code that focuses exclusively on this repository. So I've opened the repository. I'll close this other thing here. And now I'm here in the IPS National Backend repository. I'll open a terminal here. In this case, I'll run this in my local, in the same machine. I'll run the Docker compose, and nothing is being executed at present, as we can see. And I'll launch the repository. I'm sure that many of us have already done this. How do we launch the repository? Well, this repository is Docker compose, as mentioned in the general instructions, and that's it. So the repository begins to start up automatically, and that's it. Now, whilst it starts up, we can see that we have this README, which is the same one down here, but for didactical and for viewing purposes, I'll follow it as from this part. We've launched the repository, and I'll go to the last section, which is down here. And here it says that we will find a folder within this repository, which is called LACCHAIN setup. It shouldn't say client here. It should say LACCHAIN setup helper. We'll repair that, and we'll find an executable file which is called client helper. And this will enable us to conduct the configuration step by step. It also says that if we want to obtain a detail of this configuration, we have two documents, one in English and another one in Spanish. In this case, we will do this in Spanish because we have simultaneous interpretation. I'll simply have that here as a reference. And in the interpretation, we'll be able to understand what it is that we're doing. So I am over here in this repository. Let's see what it says. In LACCHAIN setup helper, I'll find a file called client helper. And so I go here, and here I look at this file, LACCHAIN setup helper, which is indeed here. And here we have a file called client helper, an executable. I have the repository running here, and what I will do is to open up a new terminal. And now I'm ready. I have everything there. I go to the documentation. In this case, I'll open up the documentation in Spanish. We also have it in English. And this opens up a new README, which explains the steps. It says, okay, what are the requirements that we need for the prior setup? Well, first of all, it says that we need to have an execution instance for LACPASS LACCHAIN, which is part of the IPS national backend available in this URL. This is what we have done. We've cloned this repository. We did this at the beginning, and that is running over here. And since it's already running, we've already done this step. It also says that you must have access to the executable script. And since I'm running this in as host, I can gain access to this file. I'll enter the LACCHAIN setup helper file because inside this file we'll find this other executable file that I want to run. So I'll enter LACCHAIN setup helper. I'm already in that folder, and if I place ls in order to list its components, I'll find the client helper.ch here. After that, it says that I must have access to internet, and that I must have the Postman software in order to interact, in order to send the certificates. That comes far later, but what is important is to do all these three previous steps. After we run the exe file, I must make sure that I can gain access to the Docker. If I check here, I can see that I have several components that are in Docker that are running, and one of these components is the LACPASS client, which is running in port 3010. It is saying here that it is running in port 3010. And just to verify this, I have to do a telnet, in other words, a query, and ask it whether in port 3010, where the LACPASS client is running, whether indeed it is listening to that. And it answers, yes, it's okay. And so I'll do Control C because indeed it is listening to this properly. So I have already done this check here, this verification. Now, since we've done that prior verification, we're now ready to execute the script. The first thing that we'll do to execute the script is to, first of all, provide the script with execution permits. We will execute this command here, which is called chmod plus X, enabling execution permits to client helper.sh. And here I will indeed grant that permit. Since I'm inside the client helper folder, it's already found that, and I've granted it execution permits in Linux. And what I will do is to execute the script. How do I execute that? Well, we, in this case, will use hash to bash for the terminals that I will be using. When I put a bash client helper.sh, an interface begins to run, and the first thing it asks me is to say, well, I'm the script, okay? Now you have to tell me where which port is running in for the Docker. The Docker is here in the same machine, and it is running as in a local host in port 3010. And so I will write that address here, localhost 3010. There it is. And after that, we'll see a whole set of instructions that I have in order to conduct that setup. Perfect. This is running. I received the instructions, as we can see in the manual. And now it says, for the LACCHAIN example, the first thing that we must have is the key with which we're going to sign the health certificates, the one that we're normally using to sign the certificates. And so if we did not have a key to sign certificates, we could use the first option, which is the SSC, self-signed certificates, to create a self-signed certificate. I will use this option, but only for demonstration in order to generate a self-signed certificate. But for the connectathon, these certificates will be provided. And therefore, just to create a certificate, I'll type SSC, which is the first option, in order to generate a certificate. So, any questions, any doubts so far? I'll type SSC, and what I see here is the following. It says, enter country code for your signed certificate. In this case, it's an ISO Alpha 2 code, and we have left a link there if you want to check the links for each country. For Peru, I'll write PE, for example. And after that, the status, the state, I'll say it's Lima, and the organization that this is just an example. I'm generating a self-signed certificate. I'll put here Ministry of Health of Peru, and I'll call it demo. And we'll add a short name because that is what it is asking for, and this is the name I'll give it. And here it gives me a summary, and it says, okay, you've chosen. You want a certificate for country Peru. The state is Lima. The organization, Ministry of Health, Peru. Demo, a common name, and use the data that are normally generated when you create a certificate. This is an RSA type of certificate that we are creating. And I'll say yes here to continue so that it can generate that. And it automatically generated that certificate X509 correctly. And if I go over here, I can see that the certificates were created successfully inside folder certs. If I go to that folder, certs, I'll indeed be able to see that the self-signed certificates have been generated, and I have a file called SCA here, which contains the certificates of the certificate authority that we have generated, and we have another folder called DSC that contains the private key of that DSC.key and the DSC.CRT, which is the signed the key that is signed by the SSCA. So we would normally use the DSC.key to sign the health certificates that are generated in the Track 2A process.
Recalco que si nosotros tenemos ya
in this case, I would like to highlight that if we already have our keys used to sign certificates, we do not need to generate self-signed certificates, and we can simply skip over these steps because those certificates will be provided for us. And so that's what we will do. Now, all these steps here, which are the steps to generate the self-signed certificates, have already been done, and this explains very clearly how these steps were done. And here it is emphasized that as countries already have their certificate, we simply skip the process called SSC. I'll simply I'll skip over that step. The next step then is to generate the DID. And in this interface, once I've concluded the generation of the certificate, I find here the menu here says to me, okay, there's another option which is called CD. And I'll type here CD, which means create a DID. In other words, we'll create an identifier here. And this identifier will be for the country. I'll just type a CD, and automatically what happens is an identifier has been created for this country, which is this one here. This identifier will also be stored. Let's see, if I close here, I'll see that in the folder LACCHAIN Setup Helper, where we're generating this content, we have also generated a TXT file, a text file that contains the DID as a memory help. This is the DID. Below that, we also generate, every time we generate ID, we also generate some private keys that are simply stored in a database, which is linked to this Docker component, simply for the sake of transparency of how this works. And this is simply a public identifier, nothing more than that. So I've created the DID, which is the next step that will be stored in a text file. And that's it. Now, since I've already generated the DID certificate, the next step is to do this step, which is very important, which is to associate the DID with the public key used to sign certificates. So let's do this step by step. The first thing that I have to do is to establish that association. I have my DID, and in the previous step, for example, in my case, I created a self-signed certificate, and I will establish that association between the DID and the certificate. So how do I establish that association? Well, let's do this. First of all, we type option AX to associate X509, which is the public certificate, with used to sign the health certificates. In this case, this public certificate will be associated to the DID that I created in this previous step up here. So when I type AX and I see this option, which is the third option, it says starting association between the DID and X509. And that's fine. So what do I do now? It says, please enter the path to the X509 public certificate. In my case, since I generated a self-signed certificate simply for the sake of demonstrating this, that has been generated by default here in the LACCHAIN Setup Helper. In the certs folder, there is a file called DSC, and that is where you'll find this file, dsc.crt. This file is the public key, and the dsc.key is the private key. The private key never leaves the repository, and here the association is conducted with the public key. So I'll point to this path where we have dsc.crt, and where is it? Well, I am within the LACCHAIN Setup Helper, and therefore I'll indicate that inside there is a certs file. As we know, the file is called certs, and within that file, there is a subfile called dsc, which is this one here. So I'll type it DSC, and within DSC, I don't specify the private one. The private one must never be specified here, but rather the public one, which is the .crt. So dsc.crt. Now, as a memory help, I've added this here. If we generated a self-signed document, but a self-signed certificate, but if we indicate the public one, which is not necessarily this one, but comes from a different source, because we have generated this as self-signed certificate, we must point to the path of this, which must establish the path of this public key. In this case, I'll press enter, and it says file found. And it is establishing the association, and it says, perfect, the certificate has been successfully associated to the DID. And that's fine, we've established this association. Now, once we conclude with that association, we will now take an additional step that says, okay, now we're going to create a manager. And the manager in in a step-by-step order would be this one here, CM. Here it says DX. That's another option. We're not going to use that option because it's to disassociate a certificate from the DID. We don't want to do that now, and we're not going to do that. But there is another association which is called CM to create a new chain of trust manager. This is a new key that will be associated to my DID. Now I'll type CM to create a manager, and this manager, now the system says, for how many days do you want this manager to be associated as valid to your DID? And I'll say 1,000 days. After 1,000 days, it has to be renewed, but 1,000 days is okay. And for the purpose of Connectathon, we will place here minimum 365, but we will add 1,000 here because it is simply a demo. So it is creating a public-private key now. It is associated to the public key as in the previous case, but this key is used for other purposes. So the association has been established. Perfect. We have concluded the generation of the creation of the manager. Now, once we have concluded this, well, that's it. We have finished the whole process. I can type exit. This means that I exit the system. And here, I would like to highlight that in the LACCHAIN setup helper folder, we generated the certificates. In case we generate self-signed certificates, we have the .text.txt and the other associations. And we have also established the associations based on the script in a transparent fashion. I don't need to have it over here because that is mapped into a database which is included in this same repository. So that's it. Well, we have then finished the process, and as it says here, we have the did.txt, and in the search directory, we have the DSC and the SCA. Now, once we already have this information and we have we have done the more tedious part of this, the next step is to share that information with the committee. If we go to this diagram, we have already configured our repository, and what we will do now is to share that with the committee, which for this example is Raxel. We will share some information such as the DID that I generated in this process, and optionally, a public key that has also been generated, or if I have not generated a self-signed certificate, but and I have my own external key, well, I don't need to share any key. Let's have a look at this process. We'll share the information. How do we share the information? I am not going to share it. I am simply going to explain it now. Basically, we will launch CLI once again. How do we launch CLI? I'll put clear here. Simply to remind you, we began this with bash client helper, as we did a while ago. And over here, I'll indicate the URL where the service is running, which is in localhost port 3010. By default, it will also run there. And the only thing that I am doing now is to know the manager. I created a manager, and now I want to know what that manager is. I quote CGM, and it immediately provides me with this information, as you can see on the screen, this contents here. And so what is it that I should do? Well, what I will do is the following. And just as an example here, in the LACCHAIN setup helper folder, I will create a file which is called, as stated in the guideline here, it will be called entity manager details.txt. So I'll go here to my LACCHAIN setup helper folder. I'll generate a new file, and I'll enter entity management details.txt, and I will copy this information here into this is the manager's information. This is public information. There's no sensitive information here. This is simply public information. The key is public. And this is the DID of the entity of the Ministry of Health. And this one here Well, and this data here, which says manager DID, and this one, which is called manager address, is the manager's data. That is what we're sharing. There's nothing sensitive here. So we already have this file. What else do we have to do? Well, after that, it says if we have generated a self-signed certificate, we must share the SCA uh, dot SCA.crt. We go to the certs. If we did the self-signed document, we will have certificate, we will have the SCA file, and inside there, the SCA's .crt, and we will share that. For our exercise, we're not going to do this because we will be given these keys, and therefore we don't need to do that. But we will still have to run this process with this information, the entity manager details. So I have this. I have the entity manager details. So we'll skip over the SCA. We're not going to do this step. And finally, what we're going to do is to generate a new file with the onboarding data. We will say that in this folder, simply for the sake of order, we will create a new file and we will call it entity details, for example, .txt. And what we will do is to copy this information and we will paste it over here. And in legal name, we'll say that it is called Ministry of Health of El Salvador. This is the FHIR URL, and everyone has a different URL. We'll say that it's this one, for example. In a port, let's say it's 8080. This is something that has to be customized in terms of what you know well, in accordance with the URL that you already have and the country code. For example, the two-digit code for El Salvador is the alpha-numerical two-digit code. I can't remember the code, but that is an alpha-numerical code of 2. We'll have to check that data later on because it's important. But in any case, this information, which is the entity details that I have included here, and the entity manager details that I have over here that I copied a while ago from down here, that information is what will be sent via mail, and we'll send that, we will compress that in a zip file and send it to these two emails over here. We will send that to E. Pacheco and to Antonio Le for the test. And that's it. We have concluded with the setup. And so now I will exit here. Here we have the following part, which is the sending. But we've already done this first part. In the main national backend repository, we have done all this, which is the onboard setup where we have configured our keys, our DID, and now we have the final part, which is the operational part, which implies being able to send health certificates to the patients, to the final users, and to have a look at the interfaces to see how what our certificates look like. So now we will take, let's see, likewise, we have documentation in both English and Spanish. In this case, I'll continue to work with the Spanish version. And here, just where I concluded the previous step, which is over here, I go to this, sending health certificates. In this part, we will send these certificates to the patients. What is it that we need to do? The service is running, and we saw that that was running okay in port 3010 by default. And we're now going to use the Postman tool to send the health certificate. I'll open Postman over here. I'll open up a terminal over here.
Ya está. Vamos a entrar a Postman.
We'll enter Postman.
Ahorita lo que voy a hacer es arrancar
And
Postman.
what I will do here is to launch
Entonces,
Postman.
estoy arrancando Postman.
So I am
Y ya estamos.
launching Postman, and
Ya tengo.
that's it.
Incluso acá yo tengo ya un
In
ejemplo.
fact, here I already have an example. Here it is.
Pero vamos a ver la guía. Me voy a
But
guiar.
let's have a look at
Después de visitar
the
la guía, me dice, como ya configuraste,
what the document
ya
says. It
está
says, since you've
autorizado.
already
Eso
sent the
en
email,
paralelo se va a autorizar, pero ya podemos enviarlos
that
aquí.
will be authorized in parallel, but that means that we can already send the certificates. The post method,
Vamos aquí.
well, the post
Entonces,
method.
la URL a la
Then
que
it says that is a
en este
URL.
caso como está corriendo en localhost, el
And
servidor
since it's running in
dice
localhost
OK,
in port
simplemente
3010, that's
activo ese
okay.
post.
And then
Entonces voy a buscar
API
el post
slash v1, verifiable
desde la
credentials, so
carpeta,
DDCC. That is the
más derecha,
complete route or
y
pathway.
necesitamos un payload.
And
Este
we
payload
also
lo vamos
need
a
a
tener que crear.
payload, which is this here.
En este payload, ¿qué vamos a ver?
In this
Acá
payload,
tenemos
what is it that we're
obviamente
going to see? Well, we
el
have a
DSC,
bundle here, which is
digital,
uh,
que tenemos
the
que
DSC
copiar y pegar.
that we have to
Por
copy
supuesto,
and
vamos a enviar
paste.
ese
For
documento
example,
a
we
la
want to
ministry.
send a
En este
certificate
caso,
to Eric
entonces el
Pacheco, which is
administrador
me,
tiene
and
que
therefore the Ministry of Health has to
ese,
copy the bundle,
ese documento una dirección
DDCC,
que, por ejemplo,
which
es
means that I have
Entonces,
received
pegar acá esa
a
dirección
measles
y me está
vaccine,
pidiendo
and
dos
that it has to
documentos
be
más.
pasted here. And here it is
El
asking for
que me
two
está
additional
remitiendo
details. First of all,
y quién está
who the
remitiendo.
issuer is and who the
El que está
receiver is.
remitiendo en este caso es el
Who
Ministerio
is
de Salud
issuing, in this case, is the
y
Ministry
quien
of
está
Health,
recibiendo es
and
el
who is
ICER,
receiving,
IDL.
and it is Eric Pacheco that is
Entonces, en
receiving
este
this.
caso,
So in this
yo voy
case,
a simular este caso
I
y
will
voy a decir que
simulate
tengo
this
aquí
case. I have, for example, here,
esto y acá tengo los mismos datos. Si
I
vemos,
have the same data
tengo el
here.
bundle por aquí,
Here we have the bundle
por acá
over
tengo
here.
el emisor
Over here we have the
y
issuer.
por acá tengo el que va a
And
recibir
down
la
here
información.
we have
Listo.
the
Listo.
receiver of the information, and
Entonces,
that's it.
en el que va a recibir la información, perdón, el que va a emitir la información
The
es el
issuer
ID del
of the
Ministerio de
information
Salud.
is the DID of the
Como ya lo
Ministry of
mencionaba
Health,
anteriormente,
as I mentioned
vamos a venir
beforehand.
aquí
We can
y
find
vamos a ver
here
que en el LACCHAIN Setup Helper
in
se
the
generó
LACCHAIN
el
setup helper. In this part, we
ID.txt.
generated the
Entonces voy acá
DID.txt,
y
which is
está
this one
el
down
ID
here.
del
And
Ministerio
here you
de,
can
de
find the
Salud.
DID of the Ministry of
Entonces
Health,
yo
which is this one
copio
here.
este
So
código
I can take
y
this
lo voy a
code
pegar
here
por aquí.
and place it over here.
Ya está. Pegamos por aquí.
So
Puedo
we
hacerle
paste
zoom.
it here.
No puedo hacer zoom acá.
No, I
Estoy
can't zoom
pegando
in
el
here.
emisor, el
I am
ID del emisor
pasting
y
the
ahora el
DID of the
de la
issuer, and
información
then the
es el que va a
DID
recibir.
of the receiver of the
El
information
siguiente
is
voy a
Eric
hacer el
Pacheco.
siguiente.
And so I'll
A
do
ver, vamos a
the
ver.
following.
Voy a ir acá.
I'll go over here.
A ver, a ver, a ver. ¿Alguien puede hacer de receiver?
Can somebody act as a receiver? Somebody who has the wallet?
A ver. El que recibe el que recibe la información lo va a tener en su
The
billetera.
receiver of the information will have this in his or her wallet. How do I configure the wallet? Well, in the
Lo digo para que esté
guideline here,
registrado, ¿no? O sea, como todavía
and
no está registrado, yo le
I
diría
mention this so
cómo
that I
puede
don't have to do
configurar su
everything,
billetera.
because any
Yo, por
person can
ejemplo, voy
configure
a
his or her
tomar
own wallet. I, for example,
voy a
will
venir
take
acá
this
a configurar mi billetera.
URL here to
Entonces
configure
voy a
my
hacer ese clic por
wallet.
aquí
What I'll
y voy a
do
hacer
is
eso.
go over here, I'll
Y
enter
aquí
this here,
ya yo voy a poder entrar
and
y
here
poner
I'll be
a
able
configurar mi
to
billetera.
configure the
Entonces, para
wallet.
configurar mi billetera, lo voy a hacer
To
en otro
configure the
window.
wallet,
Voy
well,
a
I'll do
tomar
this in a different
para crear un nuevo window, voy a hacer y ya. Acá
screen.
estoy por acá,
I'll open it.
una ventana de incógnito.
Will
Se puede ver mi ventana de incógnito todavía, ¿no?
you can see my incognito
A ver, voy a hacer
screen.
consulta.
Let's see. It seems that somebody wants to ask something.
Ya, acá Antonio dejó una información.
Okay, Antonio has
Perfecto.
provided some
Voy a
information. Okay.
configurar mi billetera. Yo voy a
So I'll
asumir que
set
voy
up
a poner
my
mi
wallet.
siguiente
I'll assume that I'm
voy a poner mis datos.
a patient. I'll include my data here, Eric Pacheco, my email. I'll add an email address there and a password, simply to show you what how do we create a wallet. It's actually the patient that creates a wallet. The Ministry of Health cannot do that, but I am working with the whole flow. When I create the wallet, the wallet is automatically configured for the patient, and this only runs in the patient's device. And once the wallet is completely generated, the patient will have a DID, an identifier. And so let's wait for it to finish this process.
Cuando genero mi billetera, veo que esto me genera
And that's
un...
it. I've generated my wallet, and I can see that that is a credential, which includes my basic data. And what is most important is that it has my DID here. Any comments? Okay, I'll copy this DID, the patient's DID. In this case, I am assuming that I am a patient. I've generated my wallet. This is my DID. I can gain access to it from here by clicking on it or as from here. I'll copy my DID as from here, and that is what I'll place here in the postman. I'll say that the DID of the person, of the receiver, is this one, the one that I have just created in the wallet. So we have the DID of the sender, of the issuer, and of the receiver. And over here we have the bundle, uh, the bundle generated by each ministry for a patient. In this case, the bundle contains information on the contents of the DSC, also an image of this content of the QR, and all this information. What we're doing is to transform it so that we can send it to the wallet, and that's it. I'll send this information. We'll send it. Okay, we've sent the information. The first interaction always takes a little bit more time, but after that, the subsequent interactions will be much quicker. We wait for a little longer,
Acá,
and that's it.
y vemos que hay un delivery
The
ID.
transaction has been performed, and we have a delivery ID, which means that the message has been delivered, so that the patient can have that available in his or her wallet. I am here in the user wallet. You can see this. Can you see the incognito screen? Yes? Yeah, okay. So what I will do here is that in my wallet, and now I'm the patient, I will simulate. I'll see if I have something in my tray. And yes, I do have something. And what I'm receiving is this information. The information that I am receiving is indeed the information that was issued by an unknown issuer for now. I'll be concluding in 1 minute if you have any questions. But in this part, we can view that the patient has received the information. If I open the information, in this case, it has a different data, Sergio's data, because I simply used an example bundle. Obviously, the idea is for the bundle to be relevant for the person that is going to receive this information. In this case, I'm receiving the information in PDF format with all the information related to the type of vaccine that is being received, the lot number, all the relevant, the information that is relevant for the vaccine. So, and that is the certificate data. And here we also see the option of verifying or checking this to make sure that the content that has been issued and sent is valid and correct. With this flow, what we're doing is to provide, to send the information to the patient. And now, in view of time, I'll close this window and I'll go over here. I already have a wallet that has already been created. Here we have some certificates that have already been issued, but in this case, they are certificates. Let's see, in this case, I simulated that the data was already sent to the committee and that the committee approved this. And so in the previous flow, we saw that it was unknown, but now we have a known issuer, in this case, the Ministry of Health of Peru, as an example. We also find a reliability chain here. In terms of authorized entity, we have the ministry, and the authorizing authority is RACCHAIN. And we have the same information in a PDF format. This PDF format will be useful because later on, as a patient, I'll be able to share my QR with any verifier, and the verifier will be able to check that this verifier is valid and was indeed issued by the Ministry of Health of Peru. But that next verification stage is something that I'll skip over. But if I wanted, but I want to know whether the flow is clear for you and whether basically, if you have any doubts in the first part of this configuration, if something is unclear, and of course, the support will be there for you to be able to follow these steps. Do you have any doubts about this first part? No. As from El Salvador, we are very clear on everything that you explained. Thank you very much. So what we have seen here is the flow. And just to summarize what we have looked at, I'll go back to the main repository. We have reconfigured the setup. We have created a self-signed certificate. If we don't have a certificate, we have generated our DID. We have shared this information via email. We have sent it to the committee, and we're using RACCHAIN as an example, and that is where the flow ended. And once the committee receives and authorizes this, in parallel, we can begin to issue health certificates for our patients. And for that purpose, we have used the next part, which is how to send certificates to patients. We have seen how to send those certificates from postman. We can do this repeatedly on several cases, stating the bundle, the issuer, and the DID of the receiver of the information. And we have also seen how this information is viewed as from the wallet interface for this specific patient, how he would actually view this information. And what is most important is how he then can have the QR that he can share with a verifier, and that verifier can indeed validate that the QR code is first of all valid and also belongs to the person that is the bearer of that QR code. So that is the scope. And that is what I wanted to share with you today. I don't know if you have any additional questions.
Lo ideal sería que los que vamos a hacer
Okay, ideally, those that will be in the track, that we should try to do this process in the next few days so that we can, by the event, we have no problems. And during the event, we conduct the postman flow, sending certificates to patients. And the other verification application that I haven't shown you today, there is another verification app that will enable us to see how we scan, how we view this QR code. And Adriana there is saying, thank you very much. And yes, of course, the idea is for this to be as clear as possible for you. And this, so that you can see this. If you have any questions, please put that in the chat, and we will be able to answer all your queries, all your questions. Let us fully benefit from these few days that we have still available so that we can reach our event fully prepared. Thank you, Eric. Excellent workshop. I'd just like to mention some in terms of you'll find this in YouTube, Raxel LACPASS version in English and in Spanish. It'll be available by the end of today so that you can revisit it and follow it and use it in the next few days so that you can make as much progress with this track. And if anyone has any questions, well, we have, of course, the Slack channels, and the team will, of course, be available for you. Adriana is raising her hand, it seems. We can't hear you, Adriana. You've muted your mic. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to ask something. Countries that initially decided that they were not going to work with this track, but that would now want to work with this track, by when should they have this ready? Well, it should already be registered. You refer to the registration in Raxel? Well, if you don't have the track, please let us know. And with the team, we can register you in the platform. Those that didn't register properly or whatever, that's no problem. Just let us know. Using the Slack channel, we will be checking this probably next week. We will be sending you the details of what track you're registered in and whether you want to register in a different one. I would just like to make one additional comment. Docker has already been updated with all the tools that Eric showed. So it's important for you to update the Docker so that you can begin to work with it this week. By the end of this week, we will be conducting the last update with the tools that are still missing and with the adjustments that we made as a result of the OMS verifier for the track 2. So please keep checking this. Of course, we will be reporting this using the Slack channel. Thank you. Oh, Abner has raised his hand. When would we be able to receive an answer? Because we have to check this, especially with the Docker update too. If we face problems, as always, run the test. If a problem arises, share the logs, share this via Slack, and we can also coordinate spontaneous meetings using the Slack. We can answer as soon as possible without coordinating this via email. So the idea is to run this, and if you find any problems, please let us know immediately via Slack. Yes, by the end of this day, this will be available in the YouTube channel. Thank you. Okay, we have run out of time, so we will conclude today's session here. Thank you very much, everyone, and I insist that this will be available for everyone by the end of today so that you can revisit it. We'll meet again on Friday during the last technical committee before the Connectathon. And on Friday morning, we will be holding the last points. So we'll meet up again on Friday. So have a good week. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric, again. Bye-bye.
Gracias, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.